Welcome to How to Find Your First Professional Job. I'm Patrick Diogenia. One of the most common questions I've been asked over the last 20 plus years of my business career is whether I have any tips for those that are just entering the professional job market. I do, and I've condensed many of those thoughts and observations into this presentation. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack than many providing this kind of advice. For instance, I'm not going to show you exactly how to design a resume, though we will cover resumes. Nor will I cover techniques for writing cover letters. Few people read them in most cases, and besides, this information is available through a simple Google search. So let me get to what I am going to cover today. You'll see the agenda on your screen. We're going to start with how recruiters see you. And we're going to end with some things that you can do to better prepare for the job market before you graduate. Now, I'm assuming that you're listening to this as you're at the tail end of completing your first university degree program, whether it's a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree. But this advice is equally applicable for those who are finishing a certificate or a certification program, or if you've just amassed many hours in the working world without a paper credential and you're ready to move on and move up. Now, there is one thing that I'm not going to cover today, which is negotiation, how to negotiate a job offer. And that's because this is a topic unto itself that we may visit in the future. Before we jump in, let's review some terminology. I'm going to cover these topics from the perspective of a hiring manager. But what is a hiring manager exactly? And for that matter, what is a recruiter? And how do these roles differ? To begin with, a hiring manager is anyone within an organization who is hiring people onto their team, often to report directly to themselves. So, for example, if you're applying for a marketing specialist position and that position reports to the marketing manager, then in this case, the marketing manager is also the hiring manager. This role differs from that of a recruiter, who is essentially a liaison between you, the candidate, and the hiring manager. Recruiters will find candidates for positions. They will review incoming resumes. They will coordinate interviews between candidates, hiring managers, and next levels, a term we're going to get to in a moment. They will facilitate background checks, especially if it's a larger organization that you're being hired into. They will communicate job offers and negotiate salaries. And then they'll generally hand off to someone else in the human resources function who will handle your onboarding if you accept the position. Now, keep in mind, in smaller companies, the role of a recruiter may be handled by an HR generalist. And in a very small company, there may not be a separate HR function at all, or perhaps there's only one HR person who handles all of these duties, or you might be dealing directly with the hiring manager or the hiring manager's assistant. Okay, what's a next level? Once you've conducted an interview with a hiring manager, you might receive a communication afterwards that says something to the effect of, "I'd like to set up an interview with my next level," or "Let's set up a next level for you." A next level is simply the individual the hiring manager reports to. It's going one level up on the organization chart. So in our example of a marketing manager who is the hiring manager, that person may report to the marketing director or the VP of marketing. So that would be the next level. In most organizations, the hiring manager doesn't have unilateral sole authority to make a hiring decision. So they will confer with the next level, or maybe even a level above that, and they'll all make the hiring decision together. Okay, what's a team? This sounds like a simple one. It's a bunch of people who work together. But keep in mind there are various conceptions of what a team is. In our example, the marketing manager might have a team of 4 or 5 people. But the marketing manager might then report to a VP of marketing who has a combined 60 or 70 people reporting to her. And then the person above her may have hundreds of people reporting to them at the senior vice president level. But they'll all refer to their chunk of the organization, all the people that report to them either directly or indirectly, as a team. So it can get a little bit confusing, and it's better to understand this going in. Okay, what is an ATS? And ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. It's a piece of software like Workday that's going to govern a lot of your digital interactions as a candidate. You're going to upload your resume into an ATS. It's going to be parsed and evaluated, at least in part, by an ATS. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Also, you're going to perhaps schedule follow-up interviews through an ATS or receive hiring documents like offer letters and NDAs through an ATS. So for that matter, what is an NDA? An NDA stands for Non-Disclosure Agreement. You might have also heard this referred to as a confidentiality agreement, which companies want you to sign as a means to protect their trade secrets and other proprietary information. NDAs are often paired with something called an invention assignment agreement, which states that any intellectual property that you create on company time is company property. The legal term of art for this is work for hire. And this is something to pay attention to if you're in the creative industries or you're a web developer and want to ensure that any code you work on for side projects, if the company allows you to continue these, remains in your control. Sometimes confidentiality agreements and NDAs are negotiable, but at larger companies, there usually isn't a lot of wiggle room. What you should do in any case is read through every document thoroughly before you agree. Make sure that you understand everything. And if you don't be afraid to ask questions. Now that we've defined terminology, let me ask you a simple question. Can you visualize how long a tenth of a second is? Just think about this for a moment. Maybe even pause the video for a second and consider this question. How long is a tenth of a second? It's a difficult question, isn't it? Well, here's a video that's going to help you nail this down. I'm going to play this here, and you're going to hear just how short a tenth of a second actually is.
This is an audio recording of 1 second with the tenths being played. See how close you are. Let's hear it again. And one last time. A tenth of a second is very, very close. Although no matter at the end of a race, it can seem like a mile.
So what's the point of all of this? And how does it relate to the race that you're running, which is getting from where you are into your first professional job? Well, the answer is on your screen. Recruiters are going to start making judgments about your LinkedIn profile, whether explicitly or implicitly, in 1/10 of 1 second. It's true. Now, the natural question that might follow is, if they start making evaluations in 1/10 of a second, how much time do they actually devote to scanning your profile? And I'm going to put the answer on the screen. 6 to 7 seconds. How do we know this? A career website called The Ladders conducted 2 studies on this topic. The first one in 2012, where they connected eye tracking devices to recruiters and determined that they only take about 6 seconds to initially scan a resume. 6 years later, they increased the sophistication of their methodology and landed on a somewhat longer scan of 7.4 seconds, which I've rounded down to 7 seconds on the slide. But still, you get the idea. You don't have a lot of time to make an impact. This is also true of hiring managers. I can personally attest to wanting to take more time, but modern corporate management isn't designed for deliberation. Often we're receiving dozens of resumes for a single role, and the only time we have to read them is between meetings or during lunch. Full disclosure before we move on. This study was conducted on paper resumes, but it's equally applicable to LinkedIn profiles, which are basically just a digitized form of a resume. You might be asking if my emphasis on LinkedIn is justified versus Indeed or any other career website. This is the answer. 72% of recruiters, and likely 95% of recruiters for Fortune 1000 companies, are using LinkedIn to source and screen candidates. So you should cultivate a profile on other sites, including any sponsored by your college or university. But considering the primacy of LinkedIn, you should start there. If you're still not convinced, here's one more reason to believe. Just over half of US college students have a LinkedIn profile, let alone one that's properly optimized. So taking the steps we're going to discuss next will put you well ahead of the pack. So the first rule of creating a good impression on LinkedIn is that photos count. This is often the first thing that recruiters and hiring managers will look at. Is the photo professional looking, or does it look like a snapshot, or even worse, a picture that was taken during a frat party or something of that nature? You want to excise all of that from your LinkedIn profile. Make sure it's a professional looking photo and that you're in professional looking business attire. Make sure that you're smiling. No neutral faces, no scowls, no frowns. This is something that the recruiter and the hiring manager are going to pick up on unconsciously in that first tenth of a second if you're smiling. And if you are smiling, they're going to automatically infer positive traits to your personality. And are you looking towards the camera? Research indicates that if you are looking towards the camera, it connotes an air of confidence, and this is going to work in your favor. Something else that you can do on your LinkedIn profile, even as a student, you can post semi-regular relevant updates. In other words, awards that you've won, mentors that you've worked with, interesting tidbits that you've pulled out of relevant coursework. Is there anything that you can turn into a newsworthy tidbit? You don't have to do this every week. Just keep your profile alive so that it looks like you're curating it a little bit and it's not just a forgotten relic that you've buried in the basement. Finally, try to remove experiences that don't really matter to the current task at hand. So, for instance, do you have awards that you won in high school that are still listed at the bottom of your LinkedIn profile? Do you have part-time work experience that doesn't have anything to do with the roles that you're seeking in the professional working world? Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you can create a connection to the roles that you're looking at, or if you can use that part-time job to demonstrate skill building, upward trajectory, or increasing responsibility, maybe it's better to keep it on there. For instance, perhaps you were a front desk associate at the campus hotel, and you devised a more efficient guest check-in process or automated part of the workflow. You can mention this as part of your explanation of the role on LinkedIn and turn this negative or neutral experience into a positive. Now let's shift our focus from resume websites to actual resumes, which are still a requirement in the professional job market. Again, this is not intended as a step-by-step on resume construction. Your college careers office can help with this, or you can consult the reference material for this section at the link on the next slide. So the first thing that I want to discuss is F-pattern reading, which is really much simpler than it sounds. It means that recruiters and hiring managers are reading your resume in the shape of an F. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second, because it's a little hard to visualize. We know this, again, because there have been eye tracking studies conducted of recruiters reading resumes for the first time and exactly where their eyes go and what they're taking in and what they're not. This is a very fascinating study, and I've linked it down below on the slide. You should really read this. There's a lot of interesting advice in here about how to best format a resume so that a recruiter pays maximum attention to it. But you can see the implications here. You want to put the most important content in the F, quote unquote. In other words, where the recruiter and the hiring manager are actually going to read it on the page. So let me show you what this eye tracking actually looks like. So here's an example here, and you can see the green areas have been read by the recruiter. The yellow areas they've paid even more attention to, and the red areas are very, very hot. That's where they've paid the most attention. And you can see that the pattern is in the rough shape of an F. So items at the top of the resume, your name, your contact information, your location, which, by the way, is important even if you're applying for remote roles to have some generic location like New York, USA, Philadelphia, USA. Your summary of yourself and any skills. And then on the left-hand side, what are they looking at? Dates of employment and the specific role that you were in and the name of the company that you were at. That's really what they're looking for, at least on the first scan. So this is where you want to focus most of your optimization in these areas. In addition to optimizing for F-pattern reading, it's extremely important to list hard metrics on your resume, which is something that a lot of first-time resume writers either don't understand how to do or don't understand the importance of. So what do I mean by hard metrics? Let's go back to the example of the marketing specialist. Perhaps one of the duties of the marketing specialist was to post company updates on LinkedIn twice a week. If all that you're doing is listing out duties like this on your resume, you're doing yourself a disservice, because recruiters and hiring managers in this space already know what the basic duties of a marketing specialist are, or any other role that you're attempting to apply for. What you need to do is turn these generic descriptions that no one cares about into information that will help you differentiate yourself. Turn it into an advertisement of what you actually accomplished over and above any other generic person who might be turning in a resume with this position on it. So what does that mean? Well, let's go to the next slide where I'm going to include an example. So here's an excerpt of an entry-level marketing resume that I've put together that includes hard metrics. I want you to see how I've optimized for this, for the quantifiable achievements and for F-pattern reading. So pause the video, take a moment, and then come back, and I'm going to show you exactly what I've done to optimize for these 2 points. Okay, here's some key points that I've highlighted. You'll see all the information in yellow. These are hard metrics. They're quantifiable achievements rather than just generic job descriptions. So instead of just saying that we've conducted targeted campaigns on social media, we indicate that we've delivered a 35% increase by doing so. We don't just say that we have increased click-through rates. We say that we've improved them by 15%. And even when listing the degree attained, or in some cases soon to be attained, we've listed that this person is a Dean's List recipient, even out before listing the GPA. Let's make it very easy for the reader to understand. Now, there's something highlighted in green that I purposely didn't change. Results-driven marketing specialist. This is a cliche that you're going to see a lot. Results-driven engineer, results-driven content manager. It's really lost its meaning because it's become such a generic and common phrase. So again, pause for a second and think about how we can fine-tune this a little bit and make it more compelling and a little bit more unique. So here's one possible remedy. You can call yourself an award-winning marketing specialist or an award-winning engineer or whatever you happen to be. Perhaps you've won an award through your department at university or through an internship. This is something that you can list that you're not going to see every day on an entry-level resume, and it's really going to help you stand out. Of course, it has to be true. A few other things you can do both to make your resume more compelling and to get it through the ATS. Try to limit yourself to 3 or 4 bullet points for each role that you're describing in the work experience section of the resume. You want to avoid long text blocks because the ATS is going to be more likely to be confused by them, and recruiters and hiring managers might be inclined to skip reading them. Concision is key. Don't list references at the end of your resume. If you want to add a line such as references available on request, this is fine, but we don't need your references at the beginning of the hiring process. If a role requires references for review, the company will ask you, and let them ask you when you get to that point in the process. I touched on this a little bit before. If you didn't win an award, don't say that you have, and don't lie anywhere else on the resume. If you were a marketing intern, don't call yourself the chief marketing officer. If your GPA is 3.35, don't list it as 3.75. Many large organizations are going to conduct background checks as a condition of formalizing an offer, and you run a high risk of your prevarications being revealed, in which case your offer will be rescinded. Of course, you can present the truth in the best possible light, and you should, but don't claim things that are just objectively false on your resume. Avoid jargon and cliches. Don't call yourself an enthusiastic self-starter. Find ways to prove through the verbiage on the resume that you are such things. Recruiters have read about enthusiastic self-starters for the last 50 years, and it's not going to do anything to help you separate yourself from the pack. Finally, for the sake of both the ATS and the ease of the recruiter and hiring manager, present your resume in a clean, basic design without images, excessive columns, or other complex formatting. If you're a graphic designer, save the aesthetically pleasing resume for the face-to-face interview or your personal website. Remember, resumes that are easy to read are the ones that are the most read. Now let's talk a little bit about discrimination and disadvantage, which from the standpoint of an entry-level professional candidate, it's difficult to discern the extent that unconscious and implicit bias plays a role in hiring decisions. And I feel it's important to understand this going in. So we can see here the disadvantage can really hinge on many traits and factors: race, ethnicity, religion, disability, and incidentally, that's not just physical disability. We're also talking about mental health issues, especially if they're chronic ones like depression or anxiety, PTSD, and so on. We're also talking about temporary injuries. Let's say, for instance, that you've broken your leg and it's difficult for you to commute physically into an office. Under federal law, that would also count as a disability for the time that you are dealing with this medical issue. Sexual orientation, of course, gender, immigrant, perhaps you speak learner English or a non-standard dialect like Singlish or Chicano English. These are all items that may disadvantage you in one way or another. Now, keep in mind that there's a concept called intersectionality. Someone might be advantaged in one aspect, disadvantaged in another. Like, for instance, an immigrant from Singapore might have a graduate degree and a significant amount of professional experience and income, but they're still an immigrant and they speak a non-standard, quote unquote, English dialect. So in some milieus, in some environments, that's going to read as a disadvantage. So to bring this concept into sharper focus, let's look at the case of Jamal versus John. Jamal is on the left and John is on the right. Now, keep in mind, these are stock photos of models. They're not actually named Jamal and John, but I'm using the images to really bring this case a little bit closer to life. In 2021, researchers sent 83,000 applications to more than 100 Fortune 500 companies. These applications were identical in each and every respect, from work experience to the degree attained to any awards won to GPA to hobbies and activities. There was only one change made for all these applications, one single variable, and it was the candidate's name. In other words, Jamal versus John. In the end, researchers concluded that applicants with quote-unquote black names, such as a Lakeisha or a Jamal, received 10% fewer calls back than applicants with white names like John. This is generally recognizable as affecting anyone with an ethnic-sounding name. So, for instance, we can assume that an applicant with the name of Juan might also receive fewer calls back than an applicant by the name of John. Unfortunately, similar biases have been found in organizations that use artificial intelligence to conduct initial resume screenings, because the training data used to inform these AI models is also inflected with human biases. So the bottom line here is, If you've applied to 50 or even 100 different companies and you haven't received a single call back yet, know that it's just a numbers game. Don't take it personally. There are many times when perhaps you are not the most qualified person for the position, but there are other times when the hiring decision is going to be more amorphous or even not make any sense at all. Here are some specific suggestions for overcoming discrimination and disadvantage. You'll see the first one on the screen has some jargon and an acronym that I'm going to define, ERG. It's an employee resource group, which is an identity-based organization to advocate for the needs of, say, LGBTQIA employees in an organization, or veterans, or any other sort of identity-based group. You'll mostly find them in mid-sized and larger companies. You can go on LinkedIn, find someone in an ERG that matches your identity, and ask them for what's called an informational interview, which is not an interview for a specific role. It's an interview just to get to know the person a little bit, moreover to get to know the organization and their culture, and if they might have any needs down the line, like, say, in the months after you graduate. This is a lower level ask than writing someone on LinkedIn and asking for a job. Therefore, it's more likely to be granted. Now, keep in mind, you might still have to write several people, but again, you're increasing your chances of success by asking for an informational interview. Some of these others are self-explanatory. Finding mentors. This is a very important one that you should put a little bit of time into before you graduate if you can. Proving that you have what it takes. What this means is show it, don't just say it. If you feel that you're dealing with multiple and intersectional avenues of disadvantage, how can you prove that you can do the job? If you're, say, a marketing major or a communications major, can you put together portfolios of work to prove that you understand the concepts that are going to be necessary to execute this entry-level role that you're going for? Can you put together a really strong portfolio of work? Are there projects that you can work on to demonstrate competence that you can then trot out and show to recruiters and hiring managers? This makes a huge difference. Don't undershoot. Many times, someone that's dealing with disadvantages will feel like they're less than, and they're going to go for positions that they're really overqualified for, even as an entry-level candidate. If you're graduating from a prestigious institution, or you have a high GPA, or you were called out as a star student, make sure that you're going for those top internships. Make sure that you're going for those top positions. Don't discount yourself. Let them tell you if you're not qualified. Let them make the decision. Don't make the decision for them. And finally, understand what your rights are under federal non-discrimination laws and the ADA. So the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, it protects not only those with chronic disabilities, but those with temporary disabilities. Like the example I used about somebody who's on crutches and has difficulty physically commuting into an office. Organizations are required to make an accommodation for a person in that position. Perhaps the accommodation is that they can work from home until their leg heals. Mental health issues also qualify for accommodation under the ADA, so don't forget that. Unfortunately, there are many organizations out there that will try to trade on the intimidation that entry-level job candidates feel for this new process and to trade on their inexperience. So that's where these danger signs come into play. Let's go over a few of them. If the interviewer is asking inappropriate questions, such as asking if a woman is pregnant or plans to become pregnant, asking specific questions about sexuality or sexual preference, asking if the candidate plans to get married. These are all inappropriate and impermissible questions, and flatly, they are illegal to ask in an interview context in the United States. Is the role commission only? Remember, we're out of the era of Cutco knives. You should be looking for roles that pay a salary and perhaps, a small bonus on top of that. There are some industries like real estate where it's an industry standard to be on commission only much of the time. But in general, for entry-level professional roles, you're not looking at commission only. And if it is a commission only role, you should probably look somewhere else. Does the role refuse to provide a salary range? Now, I'm not talking about a candidate who on the phone screen on the very first interview asks the recruiter how much they're going to get paid. This would generally be seen as untoward and a little bit inappropriate for a first interview. We tend to save these discussions for later on down the line when the process becomes more serious. However, if a company, especially a mid-sized or larger company, refuses to disclose to you even the salary band, in other words, the range between X and Y that they've budgeted for the role, depending on your qualifications, depending on your experience, that's usually a red flag if they can't even provide a range to you when you ask for one. It probably means that they haven't thought it through, or they're trying to be coy and reserve an unfair negotiation advantage for themselves. And that really foretells how things are going to be for you later down the line if you join that organization and it's time for you to have a raise or a promotion. Does the organization have extremely high turnover? Are people coming in and then immediately turning away? Less than a year, that person has already churned through and they're trying to refill that job. This is a very bright red flag. I once interviewed for an executive role at a company where the hiring manager indicated to me that the last person in the role lasted less than a year and went on mental health leave around the 9 or 10 month mark. Obviously, as I said, a bright red flag if you hear these sorts of things and it's time to run far away. Is there a mile-long list of duties that's attached to the job description? Either the one that you receive from the recruiter or the one that you see on, say, Indeed or LinkedIn. Does the list of duties go on and on and on and on and on and on, and not list that these duties are going to be split up amongst various team members, but they're all going to be your personal responsibility? Big red flag. And this one often you'll find paired with the next one, which is a salary and qualification mismatch. I've seen roles out there that are advertised as entry level, but require a master's degree and only are willing to pay $45,000 to $50,000 US a year in a major market like Philadelphia or Boston or Washington, D.C. or New York. If you see a mismatch like this, assume that the organization is the type that has a strategy where they would like to attain a Mercedes-Benz level talent for a Toyota salary. And assume that they're going to maintain this strategy throughout your experience at the company. And finally, are there excessive barriers to getting in, to even be interviewed for the role or to receive an offer? Are there aptitude tests, cognitive skills assessment, personality tests, video interviews through AIs, phone screens that are recorded instead of conducted face-to-face or live with a recruiter or a hiring manager? Are there multiple projects that you're asked to complete to demonstrate capabilities such as live writing samples, or for a computer science major, maybe there's a coding project that they want you to complete to demonstrate that you have the requisite skills, but they're not willing to pay you for it. And it's something that's going to take you several hours or even days. These are all red flags. And I would advise you to try to find more legitimate positions where there aren't so many excessive barriers to getting the job, because often with these sorts of roles, you'll go through all the barriers, complete all the assessments, turn in all the projects, and then you'll hear nothing, or you'll find out that another candidate was chosen anyway. These are really bright red flags that you should try to avoid. Now let's talk about hiring manager priorities. What are hiring managers really looking for in applicants for entry-level professional roles? Is there a secret sauce? One of the first things that we're looking for, in addition to can you meet the basic qualifications of the role are the presence of demand job skills. And these really stretch across business disciplines. Does the candidate have facility with AI and an understanding in how to use AI to boost their own productivity? Do they have data analysis skills? Do they have an understanding of basic statistics and data literacy? And at a higher level, do they understand data strategy? Project management. This is especially important at large enterprises where you're going to interface with dozens of people that have advanced project management certifications. And there's really a focus on how to better manage projects and portfolios for profitability. This is a very important one. And finally, soft skills, collaboration, mediation, communication, presentation skills. These are still important and often missing from STEM candidates or candidates that really present their hard skills first. Often we want to make sure that that data scientist or that computer science major or that engineer understands how to express themselves and has at least some base level soft skills. So if these are missing from your resume, how can you add them? If you haven't graduated yet and you have enough runway, you can add courses to your roster, if there's room, that emphasize these skills. You can pull out experiences in existing coursework that highlighted these skills, and you can list this on your resume. In other words, under the university that you've graduated or about to graduate from, you can list courses taken, and then you can list out a couple of brief examples on how these courses helped you build out these skills. And you can look on Coursera, Udacity, Udemy, et cetera, et cetera. Google also has certificates. You can look at how you can skill build for a very low cost. There are project management certificates out there that you can earn for nothing or for just a couple of $100s. So these are all some suggestions on how you can build these demand job skills that you know that we're looking for. So you might as well make sure that they're on your resume to begin with. Now let's talk a little bit about confidence versus competence. I love this image of this gentleman. He's a strap hanger on a subway, and he still looks ultra competent, like he's going to go in and crush his interview or his meeting. So there's these series of research instances called the Bellamy studies that were conducted by Peter Bellamy and colleagues back in 2020. I'm going to discuss one of them in brief. There was a cognitive skills test, like a trivia test, given to students at the University of Virginia. And the students were segmented, unknowns to them, by the researchers into two tranches. One, students from wealthy families, which was defined as family income of $150,000 US per year and up. And students from less wealthy families, which are those that earned less than $150,000 a year US. Well, it turns out that the wealthier students, as may not surprise many of you, had a much higher opinion of themselves. They thought that they had done far better on the test than the less wealthy students. But it turns out they actually did worse. They scored in the 48th percentile, whereas the students from less wealthy families actually scored 12 slots better in the 60th percentile. After they took the test, Bellamy and his colleagues set up mock interviews. And it turns out that it isn't only the wealthy students that had higher opinions of themselves, but it's also the interviewers. They consistently rated students from wealthier families as not only more confident, but also smarter and more hireable, which is completely opposite of the objective evidence. They're actually scored worse on the test. But that didn't seem to matter. What the interviewers were picking up on was the students' innate confidence over their competence. And you're going to find that this is true in professional interview contexts. Often the more confident interviewee is chosen over and above the more competent interviewee. This ties into something I call the extroversion advantage. The woman on the left-hand side of the screen is named Susan Cain. She's a Harvard-trained attorney turned author who wrote a book called Quiet in 2012 about introverts and their systemic underestimation in the business world. So let's read a little bit of this quote that I'm going to start about halfway down. She says, "Someone seems like a good presenter, easy to get along with, and those traits are rewarded." Well, why is that? They're valuable traits, but we put too much of a premium on presenting and not enough on substance and critical thinking. In my experience, this is all too true throughout the professional world. But how can you overcome this if you're not a naturally outgoing and ultra-confident presenter? One of the most important things that you can do to feel and sound more confident during your interviews is to make sure that you're thoroughly prepared. First, research the organization. Especially if it's a large public company, there's going to be a ton of information available at your fingertips. A simple Google search is going to turn up so much. What is their management structure? Where are their key offices? What businesses are they in? Which businesses are doing well and which ones aren't doing as well? What are their recent financial results? Who's the CEO? Who's the chairperson? What is their mission and vision, which you can often find either on their website or in annual reports? Even if it's a smaller company, make sure that you review their website and understand what that company is all about. Because one of the most common questions a recruiter or hiring manager will ask you is a variant on, "Tell me about the company," or "Why are you interested in working here?" And you want to make sure that you're prepared for that question. If you're not, or we can hear that you're stumbling, it's almost an instant rejection. The next thing that you can do is research the hiring manager. We're not talking about super deep dives. Just look on the person's LinkedIn profile. Look at what their previous employment experiences were. Look at where they gained their degree. Look at what their professional interests are. This is going to give you potential topics to discuss during an interview with the hiring manager, or even to bring up in an interview with the recruiter, a phone screen, for instance, just to show that you've done that extra level of homework. And it's going to also allow you to target your conversation with the hiring manager around what they really care about. Anticipate questions and try to prepare some responses in advance. There are some very common questions in different fields that you're going to be asked. For instance, if you're interviewing for a marketing analyst role, we might well ask you questions about marketing analytics, questions about Google Analytics, questions about parsing different marketing metrics. Make sure that you have responses already outlined for these questions. And try to sit down just for 20 or 30 minutes and think up some other questions that you anticipate the recruiter and the hiring manager are going to ask you. The more pre-work that you can do in these areas, the smoother your responses are going to sound. And that is going to make you seem much, much more confident. And reread your resume and either have it pulled up on your laptop or print it out and have a hard copy in front of you, even if you're just interviewing over the phone or on Teams or Zoom. The reason is recruiters and hiring managers, they might ask you specific questions. Maybe there's an internship that you completed 2 years ago, and there's a bullet point there that says that you were able to increase conversions by 15%. They might pull that out and ask you, well, how are you able to do that? And if you haven't reread your resume, you may not be able to give a convincing and compelling answer, even if you were telling the truth on your resume. It needs to sound like you were telling the truth. So reread that resume and try to come up with areas that the hiring manager or recruiter might ask you about. They might ask you to justify or explain different bullet points and different experiences that you've listed on your resume. And it's best to be ready. And most importantly, rest. Make sure that you get adequate sleep the evening before this interview happens, even if it's just a 20-minute phone screen. This is going to help you sound more composed. It's going to help you feel healthier and more centered and more ready for what's to come. Finally, let's talk about some things that you can do even before you graduate to put your best foot forward. Internships. Even after you've graduated, you can still take on an internship if you didn't have time if you didn't have space before you graduated. Whether it's paid or unpaid, these are really valuable experiences to show to recruiters and hiring managers. And try to structure the internship or create opportunities for yourself inside that internship that will allow you to list directly applicable experiences on that resume that you can define, remember, with hard metrics. Increased conversions by 15%. Did this, did that. Make sure that there's some number that you can pull out of that internship. Same thing with a part-time job. Any kind of work experience that is directly applicable to the role that you're applying for. Informational interviews, we already discussed the value of these. Try to set some of these up. Mentorship opportunities. This could be a professor. It could be someone that you interned under. It could be someone that you randomly reach out to on LinkedIn because they share an identity or a professional goal. They are where you would like to be in 5 or 10 years. Finally, volunteer and freelance work. Even if you've only completed some basic contract work, let's say that you're a communications major and you did some freelance PR work. This is a feather in your cap. This is something that you can point to and say, listen, I already have requisite experience, which is significantly more than most PR graduates, most communications graduates that don't have this level of experience yet. I've already been in the trenches. Even if you're not paid for this experience, even if you're volunteering at a nonprofit organization, this is something that you can point to and say, look, I've already done it. Therefore, I am better qualified than most entry-level candidates that you're interviewing today. If there's an overall strategy here, it's to find and fill gaps. Really, don't be afraid to be ruthless with yourself. Look at your LinkedIn profile, look at your resume, and try to hone in on your weaknesses and determine things that you can do to fill those gaps. Final thought before we part. I was a first-generation college student. I also identify as LGBTQ, and because of these factors, I wasn't sure what the world had in store for me. I dreamed of seeing faraway places, of building a career in a multinational company, but struggled to see how I could make those dreams come true. But given a little time and a lot of perseverance, I was able to accomplish things that surprised even myself, including the global adventures that brought me to the place that you're seeing on your screen right now. Write me with the location if you recognize it. Now it's time for you to take off on your own journey, an experience that can feel daunting and filled with unexpected challenges. But remember, your power lies in the things that you can control. Honing your skills, preparing diligently for interviews, and staying determined. Let go of what you can't control. Whether you're chosen for this role or that one that may loom large in your mind right now, but will be meaningless to you in a few years or even a few months. Life has a beautiful way of unfolding in unexpected directions, leading you through triumphs and trials alike. Trust in your resilience and the journey itself, knowing that you'll navigate whatever comes your way. Over time, your dreams may evolve. Mine certainly did. Embrace this change. It's all part of the adventure. And most of all, have faith in yourself. You'll find your way. I know that you will. And it will be extraordinary.